They are among the most enduring beings in all of Tolkien's legendarium. Tall, fair, wise beyond the measure of men, and seemingly untouched by the passing of the years. Many readers, and certainly many fans of the films, take it as a given that the elves are immortal. But Tolkien himself was very careful with that word. In his letters, in the Silmarillion, and in the Legendarium itself, he tells us again and again that the elves are not, in fact, immortal at all. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover why the elves are not immortal. It's certainly an understandable mistake. The elves don't age the way men do. They aren't subject to disease. Galadriel is thousands of years old when she meets Frodo. Cirdan the shipwright had stood on the shores of Middle-earth since the First Age. By any reasonable mortal standard, that looks like immortality. But Tolkien gives us a more precise word for it, and he gives it to us in letter 245, written in 1963 to a scholar named C.A. Firth. Speaking on how the elves were perceived, Tolkien says, "The elves were sufficiently longeval to be called by man immortal, but they were not unaging or unwearying." Longeval. It's a word you don't run into very often, but it's the right one. It comes from Latin, and it simply means long-lived. Not deathless, not unchanging, just long-lived. And we see in Tolkien's own framing that this is a perception from the outside. Men whose lives are brief look at the elves and call them immortal because that's how they appear, but it's not what they are. Tolkien returns to this distinction in other letters, and he uses an even more precise phrase. In letter 208, he writes, "I said or meant to say that the message was the hideous peril of confusing true immortality with limitless serial longevity, freedom from time and clinging to time." And in letter 211, he goes even further, telling us what the Lord of the Rings is really about. But I might say that if the tale is about anything other than itself, it is not, as it seems widely supposed, about power. Power seeking is only the motive power that sets events going, and is relatively unimportant, I think. It is mainly concerned with death and immortality, and the escapes, serial longevity, and hoarding memory. This is one of the most important things Tolkien ever said about his own work. He's telling us that the great theme of the Legendarium isn't the One Ring, or the rise of the Dark Lord, or even the war for Middle-earth. It's death and immortality. And he's drawing a sharp line between what true immortality would be, freedom from time itself, and what the elves actually have, which is serial longevity. A life that goes on and on and on within time, but is still bound to it. And that distinction is everything. Going back to letter 245, Tolkien continues, "Their own tradition was that they were confined to the limits of this world, in space and time, even if they died, and would continue in some form to exist in it until the end of the world." So elves can die. We know they can be killed in battle, they can be slain by grief. Many of the great elves of the Silmarillion are indeed killed in battle. Finwë, Fingolfin, Feanor, Finrod, and many more. And Miriel was certainly slain by grief. When an elf dies, their spirit, their fea, passes to the halls of Mandos in Valinor, where they may be eventually rehoused in a body called the Hroa. But, and this is the crucial point, they don't leave the world. They never leave the world. Whether walking the shores of Middle-earth, sailing into the west, or waiting in the halls of Mandos, the elves remain bound to Arda. Their fate and the fate of the world are one and the same. And here is where Tolkien gives us one of his most haunting phrases, the end of the world. What does that mean exactly? Tolkien himself admits in this very letter that the elves don't know. They have theories. We get some hints elsewhere in the Legendarium of a final battle, a Dagor-Dagorath, where Morgoth returns and is finally defeated for good, and the world is remade. But Tolkien never wrote that story in any definitive form, and the elves themselves, even the wisest of them, can only speculate. What we do know is this: whenever the end comes, the elves will be there for it. They cannot escape it. The fading of Lothlorien, the diminishing of Rivendell, the slow wearing away of all that they have loved and built, all of it leads to an end that they will witness. They cannot lay down this burden. Tolkien then turns to what the elves think about the death of men, and gives us perhaps his most piercing line in the whole letter. They believed that it meant liberation from the circles of the world, and was in that respect to them enviable, and they would point out to men who envied them that a dread of ultimate loss, though it may be indefinitely remote, is not necessarily the easier to bear, if it is in the end ineluctably certain. A burden may become heavier the longer it is borne. That is the heart of it. A mortal man might envy the elves their long years, might look at the centuries stretching out and call that a gift. But the elves know how the story ends for them. The world will wear away. Time will sweep their realms into legend. They will diminish to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten. As Galadriel says to Frodo in Lothlorien, a burden you carry for an evening is one thing. A burden you carry for 10,000 years, with the certainty it will only grow heavier, that is something else entirely. Nowhere is this distinction made more clearly or more dramatically than in the Akallabeth in the Silmarillion. As the long years of Numenor pass and the kings grow ever more jealous of the elves' supposed deathlessness, messengers come from the Eldar to set them straight. And here we find what is said to be one of the great theological passages in all of Tolkien's works. Whereas you and your people are not of the firstborn, but are mortal men as Iluvatar made you. Yet it seems that you desire now to have the good of both kindreds, to sail to Valinor when you will, and to return when you please to your homes. That cannot be. Nor can the Valar take away the gifts of Iluvatar. The Eldar, you say, are unpunished, and even those who rebelled do not die. Yet that is to them neither reward nor punishment, but the fulfillment of their being. They cannot escape, and are bound to this world, never to leave it so long as it lasts, for its life is theirs. And you are punished for the rebellion of men, you say, in which you had small part, and so it is that you die, but that was not at first appointed for a punishment. Thus you escape, and leave the world, and are not bound to it, in hope or in weariness. Which of us, therefore, should envy the others? Here we see, laid out as plainly as Tolkien ever lays anything out, the entire moral architecture of elvish and mannish fate. The elves are bound. Their long life is not a gift granted as a reward, but a fulfillment of their nature. They are the people of Arda, and they remain with Arda. Men are not bound. Death is not at first a punishment, but a release. What Tolkien elsewhere calls the gift of men, the gift of Iluvatar. And the Númenóreans here want both. They want the longevity of the elves and the freedom of men, to have the world without limit and to leave it when they please. And the elves tell them, gently but firmly, that this cannot be, that the desire itself is a misunderstanding of what each kindred actually is. This is what Tolkien meant in Letter 208 when he warned against confusing true immortality with limitless serial longevity. Sauron will exploit precisely this confusion to bring Númenor to ruin. The rings given to men are, in part, exploiting that same confusion. a way of clinging to time, of hoarding the years, of refusing the release that death offers. Freedom from time and clinging to time, Tolkien says. The elves cling to time because they have no choice. The Númenóreans cling to time because they want what is not theirs. The ring-bearers cling to time because the ring teaches them to. And this is why when Arwen chooses Aragorn, she is not simply choosing a husband. She is choosing the gift of men over the long road of her own people. She is choosing release over endurance, the end of her tale over the endless fading of it. When she lies down at last on Cairn Amroth and the light fades from her eyes, she has done something no elf had done since Luthien in the First Age. She has stepped out of the circles of the world. She is, in a sense, more free than her mother Celebrian or her father Elrond will ever be. So the next time someone tells you the elves are immortal, you'll know this to be merely through our own mannish eyes. They are in fact longeval. They are serially long-lived. They are bound to a world that will end, carrying a burden that grows heavier the longer it is borne. And in Tolkien's Legendarium, true immortality, the kind that is freedom from time rather than clinging to it, belongs to no kindred of Arda at all. It belongs only to Ilúvatar, who made the world and who alone stands outside of it. But what do you think? Did Tolkien give the elves a better fate or the harder one? Would you choose the long road of the Eldar or the gift of men? Let me know in the comments. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. CCDC Red Team, Evil Chameleon, Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Freya Firestar, Chris and Meg Q, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Kiara Berlin, Z and N, Evely, Kia, Landry Quinn Walker, Ice Glazer, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.